shattered glass. The chandeliers in the Grand Meridian Hotel ballroom cast golden light across the sea of designer gowns and tailored suits. Elise Winters stood at the edge of the crowd, a flute of champagne trembling slightly in her hand. At 32, she still felt like an outsider at these events, despite 7 years of marriage to Jonathan Pierce, one of Boston's most celebrated real estate developers. "Smile, darling," Jonathan whispered as he approached, his cologne arriving before he did. "The Henderson deal is almost locked in. Tonight's crucial." Elise nodded, straightening her posture in the midnight blue dress she'd spent weeks selecting. The fabric cost more than her entire wardrobe before meeting Jonathan, yet somehow these extravagances never made her feel more secure in his world. "There's Commissioner Abbott." "Come along," Jonathan said, his hand pressing firmly against the small of her back, guiding her like a prop to be positioned. The night progressed as these events always did, Elise complimenting Jonathan's networking with practiced grace, remembering children's names and anniversaries that impressed the wives, while the men discussed millions as casually as weather. She'd mastered this role, despite abandoning her own career in architectural restoration to support Jonathan's increasingly demanding schedule. "And what do you do, Mrs. Pierce?" a newcomer to their circle asked during a momentary lull. Before Elise could answer, Jonathan's laugh cut through the conversation. "Oh, Elise manages our household beautifully. She used to dabble in architecture before we married, but she's found her true calling, making our home a showcase." Elise's smile remained fixed, though something in her chest tightened. Dabble. Her magna cum laude degree and 3 years at a prestigious firm reduced to a hobby. As midnight approached, she found herself beside the bar, watching Jonathan hold court with several developers and the mayor. Pride and resentment tangled inside her. He was brilliant, driven, and completely dismissive of her contributions to his success. "Another champagne, Mrs. Pierce?" the bartender asked. "Just water, thank you," she replied, noticing how the room had grown louder as alcohol flowed more freely. That's when she heard it. Jonathan's voice carrying across the room with unintended clarity during a momentary dip in the ambient noise. "The secret to my success?" he was saying, arm draped around Natalie, his new executive assistant whose youth and beauty had been the subject of office gossip. "A man needs the right accessories, the right watch, the right car." He paused for effect. "And the right wife. Pretty enough to display, quiet enough to not interfere, and completely dependent on you so she never leaves." Laughter erupted from the circle of men. Natalie giggled, her hand lingering on Jonathan's chest longer than propriety allowed. Elise froze, ice spreading through her veins as she realized heads were turning toward her, expressions ranging from embarrassment to pity. The crystal glass in her hand suddenly felt impossibly heavy. 7 years of diminishment, of careful compromise, of believing that her support was building something meaningful rather than simply enabling his ego, all crystallized in that single unguarded moment of contempt. Jonathan caught her eye across the room, and something in her expression made his smile falter. He excused himself and approached her with practiced smoothness. "You look tired, darling. Perhaps you should head home. I'll be late with the Henderson negotiations." "An accessory," Elise said quietly. "That's what I am to you?" Jonathan's expression hardened slightly. "You've had too much to drink. We'll discuss this at home." "No," Elise said, surprising herself with the steadiness of her voice. "I don't think we will." She placed her glass on the bar and walked away, her heels clicking against the marble floor with each deliberate step. Behind her, she heard Jonathan call her name with growing irritation, but for the first time in years, she didn't turn back. In the taxi home, Elise watched Boston's skyline blur through tears. Several buildings bore Jonathan's company logo, monuments to a success she had helped build but would never share. By the time she reached their Beacon Hill brownstone, something had crystallized within her, not just anger, but clarity. She packed methodically, practical clothes, her grandmother's jewelry, important documents. The wedding portrait on their bedroom wall watched her accusingly, a younger Elise smiling with hope that now seemed foreign. When Jonathan returned home at 3 in the morning, smelling of Natalie's distinctive perfume, Elise was sitting in the living room with her suitcase. "What's this theatrical display?" he demanded, loosening his tie. "I'm leaving, Jonathan." His laugh was sharp. "And go where?" "Do what?" "Be reasonable, Elise. Everything you have is because of me." Elise stood, a strange calm settling over her. "Perhaps that's true. But I'd rather have nothing that's mine than everything that isn't." His expression darkened. "You won't survive a month without me. You're nothing without the Pierce name." Then, "I'll finally discover who Elise Winters is," she replied, walking past him toward the door. "I suspect she's someone worth knowing." Hollow echoes. The one-bedroom apartment in Somerville felt cavernous despite its modest size. Elise sat cross-legged on the bare mattress that now constituted her bedroom set, surrounded by the few boxes containing what remained of her former life. Morning light filtered through uncovered windows, highlighting the scuffed hardwood floors and the water stain in the corner of the ceiling. 2 weeks had passed since she'd walked out of her marriage. 2 weeks of Jonathan's alternating tactics. First rage-filled messages, then calculated silence, followed by legal threats delivered by his high-powered attorney. The latest development was a freezing of their joint accounts, which she'd anticipated but still left her with only her personal savings to sustain her. Her phone buzzed with a text from her sister Vivian. "He's been calling Mom and Dad. Says he's worried about your mental health. Dad wants you to call." Elise set the phone aside without responding. The swift campaign to paint her as unstable had been predictable. Jonathan couldn't fathom rejection, so clearly she must be having a breakdown. The apartment buzzer sounded, startling her. Cautiously approaching the intercom, she pressed the speaker button. "Hello? Delivery for Elise Winters." Minutes later, she unwrapped a large envelope containing divorce papers. Jonathan was offering a settlement, $50,000 and the car, in exchange for a quick, quiet dissolution and a comprehensive NDA that would prevent her from discussing any aspect of their marriage. A pittance compared to his wealth, but enough that many would consider her foolish to refuse. The implicit message was clear: take this small offering and disappear, or fight and be destroyed. Elise placed the papers on her makeshift desk, a card table borrowed from Vivian, and stepped into the shower. Under the lukewarm spray, she finally allowed herself to cry, the sound of her sobs echoing against the bathroom tiles. Later that afternoon, she sat in a coffee shop with her resume open on her laptop. 7 years was a devastating gap in the architecture field. 3 interviews so far had ended with polite rejections, firms impressed with her education and early career, but unwilling to take a chance on someone so removed from current practices and software. Elise? Elise Winters? She looked up to see Dominic Reeves, an old colleague from her firm days, holding a coffee and looking at her with surprise. "I thought that was you. How are you? Still with Pierce Developments?" The directness of the question caught her off guard. "Actually, no, I'm making some changes." Something in her tone must have conveyed more than her words, because Dominic's expression softened. He slid into the chair across from her. "I heard rumors about Jonathan Pierce. Never met the man, but his reputation precedes him." Elise stared into her cooling coffee. "I've discovered that reputations can be misleading. In both directions." Dominic nodded, understanding her meaning. "Listen, I've gone independent since the old days. Started my own sustainability consulting firm for legacy buildings. It's small but growing. I could use someone with your eye for restoration detail." "I'm 7 years out of practice," Elise admitted. "But you always had the best instincts in the firm," Dominic countered. "Software can be learned. Instinct is innate." For the first time in weeks, a small flame of hope flickered in Elise's chest. She took Dominic's card and promised to call, though doubt still clouded her thoughts. That evening, scrolling through social media became an exercise in masochism. Pictures from a charity gala showed Jonathan with Natalie clearly at his side now, her hand possessively on his arm. Boston society had seamlessly adjusted to Elise's absence, the space she'd occupied filled without hesitation. A comment beneath one photo from Cassandra Whitmore, one of the society wives who'd always been particularly cold to Elise, stung unexpectedly. Some women just aren't built for the demands of supporting a successful man. She always seemed out of her depth, poor thing. Elise closed the laptop with more force than necessary, anger burning through her veins. The narrative was being written without her input. The unstable wife who couldn't handle her husband's success, who'd had some sort of breakdown and fled. The following Monday, she started at Dominic's firm, Verdant Restoration. The salary was barely a third of what Jonathan spent on wine annually, but it was a beginning. The learning curve was steep. New software, updated building codes, evolved sustainability practices, but the foundation of her knowledge remained solid. "You've got good ideas," Dominic told her after her first presentation on repurposing a historical factory building. "But you're holding back. The old Elise would have fought harder for her vision." "The old Elise didn't know how easily she could lose everything," she replied quietly. That night, unable to sleep, Elise found herself sketching at her small kitchen table. Not buildings or restoration plans, but designs, clothing that transformed, pieces that could be reconstructed into different configurations. The concept had started as idle thoughts during her marriage, sustainable fashion that adapted rather than being discarded, inspired by the architectural principle of adaptive reuse. The designs flowed from her pencil with an ease that surprised her. Dresses with detachable elements that became scarves or tops, suits with modular components that could be restyled for different occasions. Fashion that evolved with the wearer's life, reducing waste while honoring craftsmanship. By morning, dozens of sketches covered her table. Elise studied them through bleary, sleep-deprived eyes, seeing both their potential and the absurdity of her midnight ambitions. She was barely keeping herself afloat, living paycheck to paycheck for the first time since college. The idea of starting a business was laughable. Still, she carefully stored the sketches in a folder rather than throwing them away. 3 months into her new job, the divorce became final. Jonathan had increased his offer slightly, eager to remarry quickly, and Elise, exhausted by the legal maneuvering, accepted the terms. The sum seemed substantial in her diminished circumstances, though it would barely last 2 years at her current expenses. That evening, her parents called. "We're worried about you, sweetheart," her mother said, concern evident in her voice. "Jonathan says the apartment you're in isn't safe. He's offered to help you find something better." "I'm sure he has," Elise replied, bitterness edging her words. "Did he also mention that he's marrying Natalie next month?" The silence on the other end of the line confirmed her suspicions. Her parents, working-class people who'd been dazzled by Jonathan's wealth and charm, still couldn't quite believe their daughter had walked away from such apparent security. "Maybe it's time to come home for a while," her father suggested gently. "Regroup. Figure out your next steps." The suggestion, well-intentioned as it was, crystallized something for Elise. Going home would be surrender, an admission that Jonathan had been right, that she couldn't survive without him. "I'm staying in Boston," she said firmly. "I have a job. I have plans." After the call ended, she pulled out her design folder and studied the sketches again. The vision was there, but the path to realizing it remained unclear. Still, for the first time since leaving Jonathan, Elise felt a sense of purpose beyond mere survival. The following day, she opened a new bank account solely in her name and deposited the divorce settlement. Then she enrolled in evening classes at the Massachusetts College of Art and Design, not to pursue a degree, but to learn specific skills in textile design and sustainable materials. The hollowness that had echoed through her days began to fill, not with certainty, but with possibility. Jonathan had been wrong about one crucial fact. Elise wasn't nothing without him. She was simply someone he had never bothered to know. Seeds of ambition. The sewing machine hummed steadily in the corner of Elise's apartment, a rhythm that had become the soundtrack to her evenings. 6 months had passed since the divorce, and her small living space had transformed into a workshop, of sorts. Fabric samples pinned to a corkboard, sketches taped to walls, and a dress form standing sentinel by the window. Professor Ramona Vega circled the half-completed jacket on the dress form, her expert eyes assessing every seam and transition. At 62, Ramona was a legend in sustainable fashion circles, having pioneered zero-waste pattern-cutting techniques, decades before sustainability became a marketing buzzword. "The concept is innovative," Ramona said, fingering the cleverly hidden zipper that allowed the jacket to transform into a vest with detachable sleeves. "But your execution needs refinement. The transitions must be seamless, both literally and figuratively." Elise nodded, absorbing the critique without defensiveness. She had approached Ramona after a guest lecture at her evening class, boldly showing her initial designs and asking for mentorship. To her surprise, the formidable professor had agreed, intrigued by Elise's architectural approach to garment construction. "I've been experimenting with this bamboo cotton blend," Elise explained, showing Ramona a swatch. "It drapes beautifully but has enough structure to hold these convertible elements." Ramona tested the fabric between experienced fingers. "Good choice. You're thinking like a designer now, not just an architect playing with clothes." The comment, delivered with Ramona's characteristic bluntness, sparked a flicker of pride in Elise's chest. For months, she had questioned whether her midnight sketches were merely an elaborate distraction from her failed marriage, a fantasy born of desperation rather than genuine talent. "I've been running numbers," Elise said, pulling out a carefully prepared business plan. "If I use my remaining settlement funds, I could produce a small initial collection. 10 pieces, each with at least 3 configuration possibilities." Ramona raised an eyebrow. "You're serious about this?" "Increasingly so," Elise admitted. "Verdant restoration is good work, but it's someone else's vision," Ramona finished. "For her." "I understand. However, launching a fashion line is treacherous territory, especially for someone without industry connections." The warning was valid, but something had shifted in Elise over the past months. Jonathan's humiliation had shattered her, yes, but in reconstructing herself, she'd discovered a resilience she hadn't known she possessed. "I've developed a marketing concept," Elise continued, undeterred, "focusing on professional women in transition, career changes, relocations, life upheavals. Women who need versatility without sacrificing quality or sustainability." Ramona studied her with new interest. "You're not just selling clothes, you're selling transformation." "Exactly." Elise smiled, surprised by how good it felt to be truly seen. "I'm calling it Phoenix Atelier, garments that rise from their own ashes into new forms." For the first time, Ramona smiled back. "Well, Ms. Winters, it seems you've found your voice. Now let's make sure people hear it." The following weeks passed in a blur of activity. With Ramona's guidance, Elise refined her designs and sourced sustainable materials from ethical suppliers. She spent her settlement more carefully than she'd ever managed Jonathan's money, tracking every expense with meticulous precision. Her one-bedroom apartment could no longer contain her expanding operation. Ramona introduced her to Garrett Fleming, an elderly property owner with a vacant storefront in an up-and-coming neighborhood on the outskirts of Cambridge. "It's not glamorous," Garrett warned as he unlocked the dusty space. "Been empty since the bookstore closed last year." Elise stepped inside, seeing past the grime and neglect to the potential beneath. high ceilings, abundant natural light, and a small back room that could serve as both workshop and office. "It's perfect," she said, calculating rapidly. "But honestly, Mr. Fleming, the market rate is beyond my current budget." Garrett studied her thoughtfully. "Ramona speaks highly of your work, says it's innovative. I'd rather have an interesting tenant at a reasonable rate than an empty building. Let's talk numbers." By the end of the day, Elise had signed a 2-year lease with an option to renew, at a rate that stretched but didn't break her budget. The reality of her situation hit her as she stood alone in the empty space after Garrett left. She was 33, divorced, with no safety net beyond her own abilities, about to launch a business in an industry notorious for crushing newcomers. Her phone chimed with a text from Vivian. "Jonathan and Natalie's wedding made the society pages. Do you want me to send the link?" "Absolutely not," Elise typed back immediately. "But I do have news of my own. I just leased a space for Phoenix Atelier." Vivian's response came quickly. "You're really doing this? That's both terrifying and amazing. Mom and Dad are worried, but I'm betting on you." Transforming the storefront took a month of evenings and weekends. Elise leveraged her architectural background to maximize the space, creating a minimalist gallery-like setting where her convertible garments could be displayed in their multiple configurations. The back room became a functioning studio with industrial sewing machines purchased second-hand from a clothing manufacturer. Production began in earnest, with Elise sewing most pieces herself and contracting specialized work to 2 skilled seamstresses Ramona recommended, recent immigrants with couture training who had struggled to find appropriate employment. "This zip-off panel becomes a wrap skirt," Elena, the more experienced seamstress, noted as she worked on a prototype. "Very clever. In my country, we had to make clothes last through many seasons and styles." "Exactly," Elise nodded enthusiastically. "Fashion shouldn't be disposable. Each piece should evolve with the wearer's needs." As the collection took shape, so did Phoenix Atelier's brand identity. Elise built a website highlighting the sustainability aspects and transformation potential of each garment. Rather than traditional models, she featured real women with diverse body types and professions, showing how the clothing adapted to different contexts. The marketing strategy targeted women in professional transition, a niche but passionate demographic that Elise understood intimately. Each garment came with a card explaining its environmental impact savings compared to purchasing separate pieces, appealing to both practical and ethical considerations. 2 days before the soft launch of her website and storefront, Elise received an unexpected visitor. Ramona arrived with a tall, distinguished man in his early 40s. "Elise, this is Theodore Walsh," Ramona introduced. "He runs Emerald Ventures, a firm specializing in sustainable business investments. I've been telling him about your concept." Theodore's handshake was firm, his assessment of the space and displayed collection thorough and unrushed. "Ramona rarely endorses new designers," he said finally. "When she does, I pay attention." "I appreciate your interest," Elise replied cautiously, "but I'm not currently seeking investment. I want to establish proof of concept first." Theodore smiled, apparently pleased by her response. Wise approach. However, scaling sustainably, particularly with ethical manufacturing, requires capital at critical growth points. "I'd like to keep the conversation open." He handed her his card, simple, elegant, printed on recycled stock. "I'm hosting a gathering next month. Business leaders committed to sustainable practices. You should come. Make connections." After they left, Elise studied the card, remembering similar networking events with Jonathan where she'd been mere decoration. The thought of entering that world again, but on her own terms, was both exhilarating and terrifying. The website launch exceeded her modest expectations. Carefully placed features in sustainability blogs and a surprisingly positive write-up in a local fashion column drove traffic and initial sales. The storefront saw steady foot traffic, with many visitors drawn by the innovative concept and Elise's passionate explanations of each design's versatility. By the end of the first month, Phoenix Atelier had broken even on operating costs, a milestone Elise had projected would take at least 3 months to achieve. Small successes accumulated. A prominent female tech executive ordered a complete collection. A sustainable fashion influencer featured the convertible blazer on her platform, and a waiting list formed for the most popular designs as initial. Inventory sold out. The night before Theodore's networking event, Elise worked late at the studio, finalizing a special piece she'd created specifically for the occasion, a dress that transformed from a conservative business silhouette to an elegant evening option with a few strategic adjustments. As she locked up the storefront, she noticed a sleek black car idling across the street. Through the tinted windows, she glimpsed a familiar profile, Jonathan watching the building with an unreadable expression. Before she could react, the car pulled away, leaving Elise with a strange sense of validation. He was curious enough to investigate, but unwilling to confront her directly. The realization solidified something within her. Phoenix Atelier wasn't just a business venture or even a path to independence. It was reclamation of a self that Jonathan had never valued, but that others were beginning to recognize. Elise squared her shoulders and walked toward the subway station, mentally rehearsing her pitch for tomorrow's event. The seeds of ambition, planted in the soil of betrayal, had taken root. Now it was time to help them grow. Silent storms. The quarterly financial review spread across Elise's desk painted a complex picture. 18 months after Phoenix Atelier's launch, the business had grown beyond her initial projections. The Cambridge storefront, now complemented by a robust online presence and strategic partnerships, with 3 boutiques specializing in sustainable fashion. Yet with growth came new challenges: increased production demands, supply chain complexities, and the constant pressure to innovate while maintaining quality. "These production delays are becoming problematic," Elise said, running a hand through her hair, now cut in a practical bob that suited her busier lifestyle. "The organic cotton supplier in Portugal promised delivery 3 weeks ago." Across from her, Theodore Walsh nodded thoughtfully. After months of careful consideration, Elise had accepted a modest investment from Emerald Ventures, allowing her to expand production while maintaining majority control of her company. "Global supply chains for sustainable materials remain fragile," Theodore acknowledged. "Perhaps it's time to consider local alternatives. There's an interesting cooperative in Western Massachusetts working with regenerative farming practices." Elise made a note to investigate. Their working relationship had evolved into a genuine partnership over the past year, Theodore's business acumen complementing her creative vision without attempting to overrule it. The contrast with Jonathan's dismissive approach to her ideas couldn't have been starker. A knock at the office door interrupted their discussion. Elena entered, holding a garment bag. "The modified prototype for the Chrysalis collection is ready," she announced, pride evident in her voice. Once a contract seamstress, Elena now served as Phoenix Atelier's production manager, overseeing a small team of skilled artisans. Elise unzipped the bag to reveal a tailored jumpsuit in deep emerald. With a few precise adjustments, it transformed into wide-legged palazzo pants and a structured top that could be worn separately or reconfigured into a third silhouette. The reinforced transition points worked, Elise observed, examining the seams. No stress on the fabric, even after multiple transformations. "The technique could be applied to the entire collection," Elena suggested. "Different pieces, same engineering principle." Theodore watched their exchange with evident appreciation. "This is why Phoenix works where other sustainable brands struggle. You're solving problems rather than just making statements." After the meeting concluded, Elise remained in her office, reviewing applications for the mentorship program she'd established for young designers interested in sustainable fashion. The initiative had been featured in several industry publications, positioning Phoenix Atelier as not just a brand, but a movement toward more conscious consumption. Her phone buzzed with a text from Marcus Herrera, the architectural photographer she'd been seeing for the past 4 months. Their relationship had developed slowly, beginning as a professional collaboration when she commissioned him to document the innovative design of her flagship store for a feature in Design Forward magazine. Still on for dinner? Made reservations at that new farm-to-table place on Newberry. Elise smiled, typing back a confirmation. At 41, Marcus carried himself with a quiet confidence that came from building his career on his own terms. He photographed buildings and spaces with remarkable sensitivity, capturing not just their physical presence, but the emotional experience of inhabiting them. Unlike Jonathan, who had demanded her complete adaptation to his world, Marcus seemed genuinely interested in understanding hers. He asked questions about her design process, offered thoughtful feedback, and, most surprisingly, appeared completely unthreatened by her growing success. As she prepared to leave for the day, her assistant Zoe knocked on the doorframe. The Boston Business Journal called again. They want to include you in their 40 Under 40 feature. Deadline for the interview is Friday. Elise hesitated. Public recognition brought valuable exposure for Phoenix, but also increased the likelihood of her path crossing with Jonathan's. So far, she'd managed to navigate Boston's business community without direct confrontation, though she occasionally heard whispers of her ex-husband's reaction to her success. Schedule it, she decided finally. Phoenix deserves the recognition, even if it makes certain people uncomfortable. That evening, as she and Marcus enjoyed dinner, Elise found herself relaxing in a way that had once seemed impossible. The restaurant, buzzed with Boston's usual mix of academics, professionals, and artistic types, creating a pleasant background to their conversation. The Kyoto project got approved, Marcus mentioned between courses. They want documentation of the historic preservation elements alongside the modern additions. It's a 3-week assignment starting next month. That's wonderful, Elise replied sincerely. Those traditional wooden buildings have such remarkable joinery techniques. The craftsmanship is extraordinary. You should come, Marcus said, the suggestion casual yet weighted with possibility. The timing aligns with your sourcing trip to Japan, doesn't it? We could extend our stays, explore beyond our work commitments. The invitation represented a shift in their relationship, from carefully compartmentalized dating to something more integrated. Elise considered it, recognizing both the appeal and the faint anxiety it triggered. Since her divorce, she'd guarded her independence fiercely, wary of becoming emotionally dependent on anyone again. I'd like that, she found herself saying, surprising herself with how much she meant it. Their conversation was interrupted by a commotion near the restaurant's entrance. Elise glanced over to see Jonathan and Natalie being seated at a prominent table, surrounded by associates she recognized. From his company, Jonathan had aged visibly in the 2 years since their divorce, his face heavier, his movements less assured. Is that him? Marcus asked quietly, following her gaze. Elise nodded, tension creeping into her shoulders despite her best efforts. First time we've been in the same room since the divorce. We can leave if you'd prefer, Marcus offered, no judgment in his voice. No, Elise decided, straightening in her chair. I'm not hiding. Throughout dinner, she felt Jonathan's occasional glances, though he made no move to approach her table. The subtle dynamics weren't lost on those familiar with Boston's business community. Jonathan Pierce, once ascendant, now struggling to maintain his position, while his ex-wife's company continued its steady rise, industry rumors had circulated. For months, Pierce developments over-leveraged on speculative projects, key investors withdrawing support, allegations of corner-cutting on recent buildings. Nothing concrete enough for headlines, but sufficient to create uncertainty. As they finished dessert, Natalie excused herself from Jonathan's table. Moments later, Elise encountered her in the restroom, the awkwardness palpable as they both washed. Their hands! Your company's doing well, Natalie said finally, her tone carefully neutral. The transformable clothing concept is clever. Thank you, Elise replied, equally measured. How are things at Pierce Developments? Something flickered across Natalie's perfectly made-up face. Concern, perhaps, or resignation. Challenging markets. Jonathan works 16-hour days. She checked her reflection, applying fresh lipstick with practiced precision. He hasn't been the same since you left, you know. The comment hung between them, loaded with implications Elise had no desire to unpack. We all change with time, she said simply, drying her hands. Some evolutions are more visible than others. Back at their table, Marcus sensed her disquiet without requiring explanation. Their conversation resumed, but with a new undercurrent of awareness that carried through their walk back to Elise's apartment. Would you like to come up? She asked when they reached her door, the invitation encompassing more than just that evening. Marcus studied her face. Are you sure? Tonight brought up a lot of history. That's precisely why, Elise replied. I'm ready to make new history. The following morning, Elise arrived at the studio earlier than usual, mind clear despite the emotional complexity of the previous evening. The 40 under 40 photographer was scheduled for 10, and she wanted to review the new collection samples beforehand. She was examining fabric swatches when Zoe burst in, tablet in hand. You need to see this, she said, voice unusually urgent. Breaking business news. The headline blazed across the screen. Pierce Developments under federal investigation for financial irregularities and building code violations. Elise scanned the article quickly, absorbing the essential details. Federal authorities had raided Pierce Development's offices that morning, seizing documents related to alleged accounting fraud and willful disregard of safety regulations on multiple projects. Jonathan hadn't been arrested, but the company's assets were frozen pending investigation. This explains why the Henderson Tower project halted construction last month, Elise murmured, recalling rumors of unpaid contractors and mysteriously delayed inspections. There's more, Zoe added hesitantly. Industry sources are saying he was desperate because of the Meridian project failure. That was the development he launched right after your divorce, wasn't it? Elise nodded slowly. The Meridian had been Jonathan's attempt to create a legacy building, an ultra-luxury residential tower that would reshape Boston's skyline. She'd seen the early concepts before their marriage ended, recognizing the flaws in its ambitious design, but knowing Jonathan would never accept criticism from her. Her phone began buzzing with notifications, former colleagues, mutual acquaintances, even a reporter seeking comment on her ex-husband's troubles. Elise set it aside, unwilling to participate in the spectacle of Jonathan's downfall. Cancel the photographer, she instructed Zoe. We'll reschedule the 40 under 40 shoot for next week. But it's a great PR opportunity, Zoe protested. The contrast between Phoenix's rise and Pierce's fall is not a narrative I'm interested in promoting, Elise interrupted firmly. Our success stands on its own merits, not in relation to anyone else's failures. Later that afternoon, Theodore called, his voice carrying the measured tone he reserved for sensitive matters. I assume you've seen the news about Pierce, he began. There's a business angle you should be aware of. Several of his incomplete projects will likely go to auction once the legal situation clarifies. The Harborside development in particular, its focus on community integration and sustainable elements aligns with Phoenix's values. Are you suggesting we bid on one of Jonathan's properties? Elise asked, incredulous. I'm suggesting we consider expanding Phoenix beyond fashion into a broader lifestyle brand, Theodore corrected. Sustainable living spaces designed with the same philosophy as your clothing, adaptable, ethical, built to evolve with changing needs. The opportunity is compelling, regardless of the property's current ownership. The concept was intriguing, touching on Elise's architectural background in a way that felt organically connected to Phoenix's mission. Yet the timing troubled her. Success built on someone else's ruins carried an unsettling resonance. Let's discuss it after the investigation details become clearer, she decided. I won't make business decisions based on reaction or sentiment. That night, alone in her apartment, Elise reflected on the day's developments. The storm that had been gathering around Jonathan had finally broken, while her own path continued, to strengthen and clarify. There was no satisfaction in his downfall, only a complex melancholy for the man she'd once loved and the years spent subjugating her own potential to his ego. Her phone chimed with a message from Marcus, checking in after hearing the news. His concern came without expectation or demand, a gentle presence offering support without requiring her to manage his emotions alongside her own. "I'm okay," she texted back. "Still planning on Japan next month. Some stories end while others are just beginning." Outside her window, rain began to fall, washing the city streets clean as silent storms continued to reshape the landscape of her life. Full circle. The Chrysalis building, formerly the Meridian Project, rose 28 stories above Boston. Harbor, its facade of reclaimed timber, living walls and intelligent glass capturing both sunlight and attention. What had begun as Jonathan's intended monument to wealth had been reimagined as a testament to sustainable urban living, with flexible residential units, communal gardens, and renewable energy systems that made it nearly self-sufficient. Elise stood in the penthouse space that would soon house Phoenix Atelier's expanded headquarters, watching dawnlight play across the harbor. 5 years had passed since she'd walked away from her marriage. 3 since Phoenix had acquired the half-completed Meridian at auction following Jonathan's conviction for securities fraud and building code violations. "The installation team is ready for the living wall components," announced Olivia, Phoenix's head of architectural integration. "The irrigation system tests were successful?" "Perfect," Elise nodded, checking her watch. "The documentary crew arrives at 9. I'd like the atrium installation to be underway when they film." The documentary, commissioned by a prominent streaming service, chronicled Phoenix's evolution from sustainable fashion startup to a comprehensive lifestyle brand advocating for adaptable, ethical living environments. The Chrysalis building represented their most ambitious project yet, a vertical community where space is transformed according to residents' changing needs, embodying the same principles as Phoenix's original clothing designs. Elise's phone chimed with a message from Marcus. Their relationship had deepened over the years, surviving his 3-month assignment in Singapore and her intense focus on Phoenix's expansion. They maintained separate residences, but had created a partnership based on mutual respect and shared values rather than dependency. Flight landed, heading to hotel to freshen up, then coming to Chrysalis for the interview. Kyoto exhibition photos got selected for the Biennale, by the way. Elise smiled, typing back congratulations. Marcus's architectural photography had gained international recognition, his sensitivity to how spaces affected human experience aligning perfectly with Phoenix's ethos. They'd collaborated professionally on several projects, their creative partnership enriching rather than complicating their personal connection. The elevator doors opened, admitting Theodore and a slim woman with striking silver hair, whom Elise immediately recognized as Ramona Vega, her early mentor. "Ramona, I thought you were still in Milan." Elise embraced the older woman warmly. "And miss this unveiling? Not a chance." Ramona surveyed the space with approving eyes. From convertible garments to convertible buildings, a logical progression I should have anticipated. Theodore consulted his tablet. "The press response to the pre-opening has been exceptional. Sustainability forums are calling Chrysalis a blueprint for urban development. We've had inquiries from municipal planners in Chicago, Portland, and Singapore about adapting the concept." The conversation continued as they toured the nearly completed building, Theodore outlining business projections, Ramona offering design insights, and Elise balancing vision with practical considerations. Phoenix now employed over 200 people across its fashion, home goods, and architectural divisions, with Elise maintaining creative direction while delegating operational responsibilities to trusted team members. "We should head downstairs," Elise suggested, checking the time. "The documentary interview is scheduled in the community atrium." As they descended in the glass elevator, providing panoramic views of the harbor, Elise reflected on the journey that had brought her here. Phoenix had exceeded even her ambitious projections, becoming a respected voice in sustainable design while maintaining profitability, proving that ethical business practices could coexist with financial success. The community atrium buzzed with activity. Film crews setting up equipment, landscape artists installing native plants in the living wall, and resident advisors reviewing the building's innovative features. At the center stood a scale model of the Chrysalis building, demonstrating how units could be reconfigured as families expanded or contracted, as work requirements changed, or as mobility needs evolved. "Ms. Winters," a production assistant approached. "The director would like to begin with establishing shots of you discussing the model with your team, then move to the sit-down interview." Elise nodded, smoothing her jacket, a Phoenix original that could transform from business attire to evening wear with a few precise adjustments. As she moved toward the designated area, she froze momentarily at the sight of an unexpected figure standing near the building's entrance. Jonathan Pierce, considerably thinner than when she'd last seen him, watched the activity with an unreadable expression. His once impeccable appearance had given way to a more subdued look. Quality clothing, but without the ostentatious accessories he'd once favored. His 2-year sentence had been commuted to house arrest and community service after 18 months. According to Business News, Elise had deliberately avoided following closely. Their eyes met across the atrium, a moment of recognition that sent an unexpected ripple of emotion through her. Not fear or anger, but something more complex, a muted acknowledgement of shared history and divergent paths. Marcus arrived, greeting Elise with a quick kiss before noticing her distraction. Following her gaze, he tensed slightly. "Should I ask security to intervene?" "No," Elise decided after a moment. "He's not causing any disturbance." The interview proceeded as planned, with Elise articulating Phoenix's philosophy of adaptive, sustainable design across multiple contexts: fashion, home, architecture. She spoke with the quiet confidence of someone whose vision had been validated, not just commercially but culturally, as consumers increasingly embraced more conscious relationships with their possessions and living spaces. Many business analysts cite Phoenix as an example of crisis transformed into opportunity, the interviewer noted. "How much of your success do you attribute to the difficult end of your first marriage?" The question, though expected, still carried an edge. Elise considered her response carefully, aware of Jonathan's continued presence at the periphery of the gathering. "Phoenix wasn't born from adversity," she answered finally. "It was always there, waiting to emerge when I found the courage to value my own vision. Sometimes we need to shed an identity that no longer serves us before we can create something authentic. That's true in personal relationships, in business, and in how we relate to our physical environments." Hence the name Phoenix, the interviewer supplied. "And Chrysalis," Elise added with a smile. "Transformation isn't always about destruction and rebirth. Sometimes it's a gradual becoming, the realization of potential that was present all along." After the interview concluded, Elise circulated among the guests, discussing Phoenix's upcoming projects and fielding questions about the building's innovative features. Throughout, she remained aware of Jonathan's presence, though he made no attempt to approach her. As the event wound down, Theodore drew her aside. "Pierce requested a word with you. I told him it was entirely your decision." Elise hesitated, searching her feelings. The anger that had once fueled her determination had long since transmuted into something more productive. Jonathan no longer held power over her emotionally or professionally. "I'll speak with him," she decided. Briefly. They met in a small conference room off the main atrium, the glass walls ensuring their conversation remained visible to others while providing acoustic privacy. Up close, the changes in Jonathan were more pronounced. Lines etched around his eyes, a certain heaviness in his movements suggesting lessons learned at significant cost. "Congratulations," he began awkwardly. "What you've created here is remarkable." "Thank you," Elise replied, her tone neutral. "What can I do for you, Jonathan?" He gestured toward the window overlooking the harbor. "This was supposed to be my legacy project. I had such grand plans for the Meridian." A faint smile touched his lips. "Your version is better, more thoughtful, more sustainable in every sense." The admission surprised her. The Jonathan she'd known would never have acknowledged someone else's superior vision, particularly not hers. "Prison changes perspective," he continued, correctly reading her expression. "So does losing everything you thought defined you." He paused, choosing his next words carefully. "I'm not here to apologize. Words seem inadequate for the years I spent diminishing you." "Then why are you here?" Elise asked quietly. Jonathan reached into his jacket, withdrawing a business card. "I've started a small consulting firm helping companies navigate regulatory compliance, particularly regarding building safety codes. I know them intimately now, from both sides of enforcement." He placed the card on the table between them. "I'm not asking for partnership or even endorsement, but if Phoenix ever needs specialized compliance consulting for future projects, well, I'd appreciate the opportunity to contribute something positive." The request held no manipulation, no attempt to leverage their past relationship, just a straightforward business proposition from someone intimately familiar with the consequences of ethical compromises. "I'll consider it," Elise said finally, neither accepting nor rejecting the overture. "Phoenix has stringent standards for all our collaborators." Jonathan nodded, accepting the implicit challenge. "As it should." He moved toward the door, then paused. "For what it's worth, Elise, I always knew you were extraordinary. I just feared what that meant for me." After he left, Elise remained in the conference room, processing the unexpected encounter. The meeting represented neither reconciliation nor closure. Those had come through her own journey, not through any interaction with Jonathan. Instead, it offered a quiet affirmation that the past, while informative, need not constrain the future. Marcus found her there a few minutes later, concern evident in his expression. "Everything all right?" "Yes," Elise replied, realizing she meant it completely. "He wanted to offer his consulting services for future projects." Marcus raised an eyebrow. "And?" "And I told him we have standards." Elise smiled, taking his hand. "But people can change. I'm living proof of that." They returned to the atrium, now bathed in afternoon light filtering through the living wall. The documentary crew was filming final establishing shots, capturing the building's seamless integration of natural elements with innovative technology. "We should finalize plans for the Tokyo expansion," Theodore mentioned as they rejoined the group. "The property we've been considering goes to market next month." "I'll review the proposal tomorrow," Elise promised. "But tonight we're celebrating the chrysalis." Later that evening, Phoenix's team gathered on the rooftop garden for a private reception. String lights illuminated native plantings and modular seating areas, while the city skyline provided a spectacular backdrop. Elise stood slightly apart, watching her vision embodied in both the building and the community of people who had helped realize it. Ramona approached, champagne flute in hand. "When you showed me those first sketches in your tiny apartment, I saw potential. But this," she gestured expansively, "this exceeds even my expectations." Mine too, Elise admitted. I was just trying to survive then. I never imagined. That's the beauty of transformation, Ramona said wisely. We rarely recognize our own potential until circumstances force us to discover it. Marcus joined them, slipping his arm comfortably around Elise's waist. The documentary director is thrilled with today's footage. Says the contrast between the building's industrial past and sustainable future makes for a compelling narrative. Speaking of narratives, Elise said, I've been considering your proposal. 2 weeks earlier, Marcus had suggested they consider living together, pointing out the inefficiency of maintaining separate residences when they spent most nights together anyway. Elise had asked for time to reflect. Not from uncertainty about their relationship, but from lingering caution about surrendering her hard-won independence. And? Marcus asked, his expression open. Elise smiled, feeling the last fragments of fear dissolve in the warmth of certainty. I think the Chrysalis building should demonstrate its adaptability, perhaps by combining 2 adjacent units into a shared space that still honors individual needs. Marcus's face brightened with understanding. A home that evolves as we do? Exactly, Elise replied. Transformation doesn't have to mean losing yourself. Sometimes it means creating something new together while preserving what matters most to each person. As night fell over Boston, the Chrysalis building illuminated from within, its adaptive systems responding to occupants' needs while minimizing environmental impact. From the harbor, it appeared as a living organism, breathing, changing, yet fundamentally stable in its core structure. Standing amid her team, with Marcus beside her and the future expanding before them, Elise recognized that her journey had, indeed, come full circle. Not back to where she'd begun, but to a place where all her experiences, even the painful ones, had shaped something stronger and more authentic than she could have imagined. The woman who had once been defined by another's perception now defined her own reality, creating spaces, both literal and figurative, where transformation wasn't just possible, but celebrated. The ultimate rebuke to Jonathan's dismissal wasn't in proving him wrong, but in transcending the limited future he'd envisioned for her to create something neither of them could have predicted. As guests raised glasses to toast Phoenix's success, Elise added her own silent acknowledgement to the broken pieces that had become building blocks, to the pain that had fueled purpose, and to the courage required to rise from ashes and emerge from chrysalis alike. Some journeys began with endings. The truest success lay in recognizing when one chapter closed so another could begin.